Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition information. I wanted to talk today about selenium. It's a topic that I've covered a number of times before, and I've written many articles on my blog about selenium. Selenium is an essential mineral in human nutrition. In other words, humans need a daily intake of selenium, and if they don't get their requirement of selenium every day, humans will get disease. Their bodies, their tissues will break down without selenium, and they will get an increased risk of disease. And what research is showing is that those humans that don't manage to get their daily requirement of selenium, those humans that become depleted in selenium, they have an increased risk of cancer. Now, the reason for this is very likely that selenium is incorporated into proteins. Quite often selenium will take the place of sulfur in amino acids, and then will be incorporated into proteins. And there are a number of enzyme systems. Enzymes are proteins. There are a number of enzyme systems in humans that require selenium for their function. And one of the most well researched is the glutathione peroxidase enzyme system. Now, glutathione peroxidase is a very important cellular antioxidant, and many studies have shown that those people with higher levels of glutathione peroxidase, those people with higher activities of glutathione peroxidase in their tissues, have a reduced risk of certain diseases, and one of those would be cancer. So selenium is very important. It's absorbed into humans, it's an essential mineral, and then it's incorporated into a number of different enzymes, one of them being the glutathione peroxidase enzyme system. And that enzyme system is a very important antioxidant defense within cells. Now, if the glutathione peroxidase proteins that are produced in our cells, if they don't have access to selenium, the shape of the protein is not able to be a functioning protein. In other words, the selenium is required by the protein in order to be able to fold the amino acid chain into the correct shape, in order for that glutathione peroxidase to have the correct shape so that it can perform its antioxidant effects. Without the selenium, that protein is not able to fold correctly, and therefore it is not able to function in its cellular role. So selenium is very important, and selenium is very important for reducing the risk of cancer, particular types of cancer. Now, many studies have looked at the selenium intakes of humans, and those living in Western populations generally have low intakes of selenium. Now, there's a number of reasons for this, and the main reason is that most people don't eat a very healthy diet. Most people eat low quality foods, and the types of foods that contain selenium are not generally the types of foods that people eat in Western civilization, and therefore the selenium intake is generally low in Westerners. There are particular areas around the world where selenium intake is lower than other areas, and this relates to the fact that certain geographical areas have low selenium contents of the soil. Now, this is worth explaining because this is the part that most people don't understand. Most people will consider that they get their nutrients from their food, and as long as they eat a balanced diet, they will get all the nutrients they require. And that may have been true historically. But there are temporal and geographical reasons why you may not get adequate minerals in your diet, even if you eat a high quality diet. So selenium is in the soil. Selenium is in the soil as either selenite or selenate. They're the two inorganic forms of selenium that are basically ground up rock. When rocks become eroded and weathered and they form the soil, the selenium from the rocks is released into the soil, and it's in the form of selenite or selenate. Now, these inorganic forms of selenium, they can be absorbed in humans, and certain mineral tablets, supplements do contain selenite or selenate as their form, but they're not very bioavailable. What happens in the soil? You grow the plants on the soil. The plants absorb these inorganic forms of selenium up through their roots with the water, and these forms of selenium are then incorporated into proteins in the plant. Now, the two most common common amino acids that can incorporate selenium are methionine and cysteine, and that they then form selenomethionine and selenocysteine. And what effectively happens is the sulfur on these amino acids is knocked off, and the selenium replaces the sulfur. So these amino acids incorporate selenium, and then these amino acids are incorporated into proteins in the plant. And this is a much more, these forms, these selenomethionine and selenocysteine, are much more absorbable forms of selenium. So when we then eat the plants, we absorb this highly absorbable form of selenium, and this then is incorporated into our own tissues, where the selenium ultimately ends up in enzyme systems such as glutathione peroxidase. So all of this is assuming that the selenium is in the soil to start with. Now, there are geographical regions in the world where there is known to be low levels of selenium. There's the Henan province in China, for example. New Zealand has quite selenium poor soils, and so does Finland. And studies that have looked at the populations that live on these, traditionally live on these in these areas, show that they have lower levels of selenium than some other areas that are richer in selenium. So low selenium soil is bad, and it's bad for the health. And you can eat what looks like a healthy diet, but if you're eating that healthy diet in these geographically selenium poor areas, you're going to be deficient in selenium, and the animals that eat the crops, including humans, will be deficient in selenium. And there are many factors as well. Even if there is selenium in the soil, there are many factors that can prevent the uptake of the selenium to the plants. For example, certain plants don't tend to accumulate selenium. Certain crops don't accumulate selenium, whereas other plants do accumulate selenium. So the types of foods, the type of plant food that you eat, can also affect the amount of selenium that you have in your tissue. The acidity of the soil is also important. If you have, for example, very acidic soil, the selenium will be maintained in its reduced form, in its selenite form, and therefore it will become less soluble. If the soil becomes more alkaline, if the pH increases, that oxidizes the selenite to selenate, and the selenate is therefore more soluble, and therefore the plant can uptake more of that selenium, and therefore plants grown on alkali soils tend to accumulate more selenium. The sulfur content of the soil also can affect the uptake of selenium, so can the drainage. There are many factors, and therefore just because there's selenium in the soil, and just because you grow plants on that soil, doesn't mean that those plants are going to contain the selenium. So there are many factors that can get in the way of us ultimately getting the selenium that we require, which ultimately comes from ground up rocks which are in the soil. So ultimately we want to be able to get that selenium into our diet. So what types of foods would we eat if we wanted to try and maximize the amount of selenium that we had in our diet? Well, plants store the selenium in amino acids, in methionine and cysteine, and those amino acids are then incorporated into proteins in the plant. So plant protein would be where we would get and where we would expect to find selenium, assuming that there was selenium in the soil. The same is true of animals. When animals eat crops, they absorb the selenium and it goes into their own tissues, and it's incorporated again into methionine and cysteine in proteins, and therefore animal protein is a reasonable source of selenium as well. Now, there have been studies that have been done in New Zealand that have looked at the selenium concentration of humans over time, and what they found is that when there was an increase in the amount of seafood that the New Zealand population started to consume, and also an increase in the amount of animal protein, what they found is that the population actually had an increase in their tissue levels of selenium. And the reason for this is that we don't need to just rely on crops in order to be able to get our selenium, because farm animals now, when they're reared, tend to be fed selenium, and therefore animal protein is actually quite a good source of selenium. Fish and other aquatic organisms can actually absorb selenium from the water, and therefore certain fish actually have quite high levels of selenium as well. Tuna fish has been looked into, and I think there is an article on my blog that you can have a look for if you search for tuna fish and selenium. There is an article that shows that tuna actually has quite high levels of selenium as well. So we don't necessarily need to just consume crops in order to get selenium, but most of the selenium in either plant food or animal tissue would be in the protein content. So this is just a general discussion on where you would find selenium and the factors that would affect the absorption. Now, assuming that you eat assuming that you do eat animal tissue, and assuming that you do eat fish, and assuming that you eat a high quality diet, the chances are that you will have enough selenium in your diet. The problem is that you can't guarantee that. Now, there was a paper published by Clark in 1996 that looked at the effects of supplementation of 200 micrograms of selenium on a population of individuals, and it found that the total mortality from cancer was reduced by 50% in those subjects that were given 200 micrograms of selenium. Therefore, my argument is that if you want to replicate the effect of reducing your chance of your risk of mortality from cancer by 50%, you should take a selenium supplement. Now, you could theoretically get 200 micrograms of selenium from your diet, but because you can't guarantee it, and you don't know what content you don't know where those crops that you're consuming have been grown, you don't know what the animals have been fed, and you don't know where the fish have come from. So you don't actually know how much selenium is in your diet. Now, let's assume that you did have 200 micrograms of selenium in your diet. If you take 200 micrograms as a selenium supplement, you then have 400 micrograms of selenium in your diet. At that level, selenium isn't toxic. You can take much higher concentrations of that before selenium becomes toxic to humans. So by taking that tablet, you would effectively be taking more selenium than you possibly require, but you'd still be getting the benefit of your maximizing the tissue concentration of selenium, and therefore that would reduce your risk of mortality from cancer. If your diet was of high quality, but for some reason all of the foods that you were eating were deficient in selenium, but you took a 200 microgram selenium tablet, you would still get the effect. So to me, it's a very effective insurance policy to take a 200 microgram tablet of selenium. It's one of the supplements that I repeatedly suggest people take. It is interesting that when I was doing research in the past, there was a group of individuals that were studying selenium and the effects on human tissues, and I did notice that some of them had selenium tablets on their desk. Whether they were actually taking the selenium or it was part of their studies, I don't know, but I like to think that they would convince themselves that selenium was an important supplement and they decided to take it. I would therefore recommend that everybody takes around about 200 micrograms of selenium. Some multivitamins do actually contain that amount of selenium, in which case you wouldn't need to take a separate tablet. So have a look on your multivitamin and see how much selenium there is in there. Top it up so that your total intake of supplement is about 200 micrograms, and really you want the selenium in the selenomethionine or selenocysteine form. These are the biologically active forms of selenium that we absorb quite readily. Selenate and selenite, they are absorbed and they will incorporate into human tissue, but they're more readily excreted and they're not so readily retained by the tissues in humans. So I would always suggest that you get these amino acid forms of the selenium, because it's the same form that you would get if you are consuming plant tissue or animal tissue with selenium in it. So that was just some information on selenium. I just wanted to cover, I have new subscribers on my channel, people that haven't seen some of my older videos, so the important nutritional aspects I like to repeat, and there was some extra information in there hopefully, and those people that are perhaps not taking a selenium supplement, this may be of interest. So as I always say though, do your own research. This is for information purposes only. I'm just discussing what I've read in the nutritional research and my opinion. You need to do your own research, you need to become your own nutritionist, and you need to make your own decisions. But hopefully this information has been useful, and you can use this with other information in order to be able to put together the pieces of the puzzle in order to be able to make the diet that is optimal for yourself, and which will actually be different for different people, because everybody has their own biological individuality, and therefore everybody needs their own individual diets. So I hope that was interesting. If you've got any comments on this video, it's very interesting to read people's comments, so please continue to put them in the comments box below. I do try and respond to all the comments if I can, but sometimes it's not that easy, so be patient if I don't respond to your comments. I will get around to it eventually. And particularly if you've got any comments on selenium and your experiences of taking selenium, and any information, any links to things that are useful, like papers, are always, I'm sure the subscribers and the people watching this video would be interested to read more on this subject. So that's all I've got to say about selenium. I would recommend that you take a supplement, and I would recommend that you take it in the selenomethionine or selenocysteine form. So eat well, protect yourself, stay healthy, and I'll see you soon for another video. And in the meantime, take care.